is a uniquely human method of communication. No other animal passes on information or expresses emotion through a system of complex mark making. Even though bees have a complex visual communication with each other, they don't keep there's no permanent record of the communication. So that is one way that we're different than bees, in case you were wondering. Okay? So you are the prompt for chapter 1 is to consider and understand no graphic object is discrete or isolated. All cultural expressions participate in systems of production. So how does the previous statement apply to the following artifacts: a prehistoric cave painting, a clay tablet with cuneiform, and an example of Egyptian hieroglyphics? And so I'm going to make sure I started my timer. Oh, they didn't, so I'll start it now. Typical of me. Okay. So what's really important about this is that idea that it's a system of production, and I tried to really stress that by showing you a video of how children develop language and how original graphic communication was pictographic, but it went through this huge cognitive leap of becoming phonetic. So pictograms began not only to be a one-to-one connection, like a picture of the sun to mean the object of a sun, but eventually, the first letter of the picture came to represent. So you needed to know the language to understand the communication. With pictographs, you didn't need to know the language. They're more universal. You just need to be able to see them with your eyes. You can understand them. But visual communication becomes more connected with the actual language as we progress through this chapter. So graphic communication have always depended upon the designs of symbols and images that are recognized according to the conventions of the community. So people need to understand what the symbol of a sign means, right? As those symbols become abstracted, as they begin to represent sound. To begin with, we have this cave painting from Altamira, Spain, circa 16,000 to 9,000 BCE. And this is pictographic communication. It's a one-to-one relationship. It's a graphic sign that communicates through the eye. And some things you could note about this, if you need to talk about its system of production on the test, you would want to know that, there's figure ground distinctions, scale relations, a random organization of images, no grid. The figures are clear and distinct, and the ground on which they appear is well prepared and an organized surface. That comes directly from the Drucker-McFarish book. So if you go through the reading prompts and you answer them from the book and you supplement what I said by adding more context in lecture, you are fine for the test. What you need to know is the reading prompts. And some of the reading prompts would be hard to understand and answer if you didn't come to class. And I'm going to remind you of those things today. So this is made with black from charcoal, so that's part of the system, right? Reds and yellows made from iron oxides mixed with a medium of fat, painted with fingers or brushes made of reeds. And materials were pre-made, so they show forethought. We also talked about who made it, a woman or a man, and what was it made for. Well, we don't know, but some of the hypotheses include that it was made for survival or utilitarian ritualistic purposes, or maybe it was symbolic of a worldview. We don't know, okay? But we do know that it was part of a system, right? That there were colors prepared, there was a considered application onto the ground of the stone. Okay, so here's just a visual for you, brushes made of reeds and iron oxide. So that's part of the system that, it's part of the technology. And remember that these things go together, like who is the maker, what's the political and social situation at the time, what technology was used has a direct impact on the form, right? So that goes across all of this. That's why I've been emphasizing it a lot. But I have a tangent for you. I love tangents, right? So this past weekend I was in New Mexico at a conference, and I went to see some petroglyphs, and it was so cool to see them. So these are anywhere from 3,000 years old to 500 years old, and they're from the Pueblo Native American people in New Mexico, and it was so exciting. And it was a super uninhabited space, I can travel today. so crowded. You know, there's so many people on the earth, and everyone travels, and you have to like be in these huge crowds now to see natural wonders and stuff. But there was basically almost nobody on this path, and it was amazing. And we got to walk right up to some of the petroglyphs, and you might recognize some people in this picture who I was with, who I met in 145 last year. So that's Patty Chen, Margot, and Rakaya. I met them in 145. We ended up working on a project together, so we all went to New Mexico. And of course, Brett, who I did know before 145. I was teaching 145 before he was a faculty here. And then Tracy Corrado, who is a second-year grad student right now. But enough about me. Back to you. So the Kunis is cuneiform is the next artifact, and it's a clay tablet. This is the example of a clay tablet, the cuneiform, from Iraq, 3000 BCE. So it's like about the same time of those petroglyphs. So that's like so interesting. And these tablets were about 1 inch thick. They came in various shapes and sizes. Mud that was light clay was placed in a wooden frame. The surface was smoothed for writing and allowed to dry until it was damp, and then it would be inscribed. After it was inscribed, it would be dried in the sun for a harder finish, and sometimes baked in a kiln. Some things that we talked about, like I asked you when I showed this originally, like what you see in this. There's meaningful organization. There's a grid. You see fundamental graphic principles that we use still today, like shape, size, orientation, position. It seems to have a system, a systematic visual design. There are grid zones, the use of juxtaposition and sequence. And sequence is super important in communication, a sense of visual hierarchy and direction. And a distinction of mark and interval on a deliberately identified surface is the basis of any graphic communication. And that's also a quote from McFarish and Drucker. So the angles are something important to notice. Sorry, I got a little sick on the weekend too. The angles are they are there because of the tool made to use it. It's not just that the scribe thought, oh, this is going to look really cool if I angle it, right? It's because it was made with a kunis, which is a wedge-shaped stylus. I'll show it to you next. And also important to think about how these kinds of artifacts operated culturally is that writing forms a sense of history because events start to be recorded. Different than oral culture, where the history resided in individuals, now it resided outside of individuals for others to access. It's a very different kind of communication that has benefits and drawbacks. You should think about that critically. What are the benefits? What are the drawbacks? What is gained and what is lost? Okay, because that's something I've emphasized throughout the first part of the quarter, so it might be something you would see on a test. So they recorded they recorded poetry, myths, epics, and legends, which all form the field of literature. And libraries at this time would be filled with clay tablets because they were seen as very important artifacts early on, and so they were stored in libraries. But imagine the amount of space they would take up since they're like this 1 inch thick clay. And this is what they were made with, a kunis, which is Latin for the word wedge. It's a stylus mostly made of reeds. This one in this example is made of bone, and it would be pressed into the wet clay. And because it is triangular, when it presses in, it makes that wedge-shaped form in the actual cuneiform. So it's not because somebody thought, hey, this is a great idea, this is really cool. It's like because they had this reed, this kunis, and that's the kind of mark it made. So it's always intertwined with technology, audience, intention, stakeholders, and the political and cultural climate. Okay? So what was really amazing is that cuneiform started out as a pictographic language, but evolved into a rebus or phonetic language, so that, like I was saying, the picture of the sun came to represent the sound S eventually, right? So it goes through this long process, but it is hugely important to go from a pictographic system that is not based in language to phonetics, which are based in knowing that particular language. So phonetic writing is also called rebus, a system in which words and syllables are represented by objects and by symbols whose names are similar to the word or syllable to be communicated. And it's a precursor to the alphabet, right? Because the alphabet is even more abstracted from the pictograph than rebus is. So read separately in this image, you would see B and leaf and C and sun. But using rebus, you have belief and season. So it's a bee and a leaf is really different than the concept of belief, right? So I see a bee, it landed on the leaf. It's totally different than I have a belief in your power to do well on this test. Okay, so an important theorist around looking at orality and literacy. And I'm going to go, I know I'm going to be a few minutes over on this first chapter because there's 3 slides in this left. Then I'm going to stay in my 10 minutes. Walter Ahn says we have to remind ourselves from time to time that writing is completely and irremediably artificial, and that what you find in a dictionary are not real words, but coded marks for voicing real words, exteriorly or in imagination. I just want you to revel a minute in this amazing fact that we have written language. It's so abstract, but it works because we all believe in it. We all believe that an A is a round sign with a straight line, and it's the first letter of the word apple. We believe that. It's not universal fact. It's not. It's just a system we believe in. And that is pretty amazing because we accomplish so much with 26 letters, So just, want you to keep that in mind. And then the example of hieroglyphics, this is the lintel from the reign of Sesostris III from Egypt, 1887 to 1850. And the Egyptian hieroglyphs were very similar in some ways to cuneiform in that they were also a rebus system. They also had both pictographic and phonetic interpretation. So that's also just amazing, and they happen at different times. The Egyptians are making the hieroglyphics later. So it's a picture writing system. It's hieroglyphic is Greek for sacred carving. In this example, it's incised relief, which means the subject is carved out. Some of it is engraving, but this example is incised relief. And they considered writing to be a gift of the gods. And that in this case, this picture is a description of an exchange between a king and a god. And it's a fundamental scene of worship, a rigorous, elegant composition carved in hollow relief. It's a system of both rebus and phonetics, and the lintel is the horizontal support of stone at the entrance to that temple. In this case, it's dedicated to the god Montu at Metamud. I'm sure I'm saying those words wrong, sorry, better pronunciation, in Upper Egypt. And what's important here is also the way scribes were treated. And the same for cuneiform. Scribes were held in high regard, high social status in ancient Egypt. In ancient Egyptian culture, scribes did not have to pay taxes, and they were seen to have magical properties because they could foretell the future. Because eventually, scribes are putting language onto papyrus, which is a more inexpensive form media that regular people, although it still had to be pretty well-to-do, could afford, and they could get a safe passage to the afterlife through the knowledge of the scribe. So scribes were thought to have magical powers. They could foretell the future. And they were, of course, almost exclusively men. So here's an example of a scribal palette, and it's also the evolution of the hieroglyph for scribe. And you could see how in the beginning of the hieroglyph, it was a kind of one-to-one relationship with what the palette and the dry ink cakes would look like. And you could see how it becomes abstracted over time. Brushes might be made of reeds anywhere from 6 to 16 inches in length. They would have 1/16 to 1/10 of the diameter. And here's an example of a mallet and chisel if it was an inscription. Here's an example of some of the inks that would be used. So Illustrations were drawn in simplified contour lines using black or brown ink from soot or charcoal or burnt animal bones, and flat color applied using white, like bone or chalk, black, brown, and blue from lapis lazuli. Green might be a mixture of copper and iron or malachite, and yellow and red from iron oxide. Now, I'm not going to ask you those specific inks, like tell me 5 places that the ink came from, but you want to know, have a general idea, because given an essay question, it might say something like, tell me 5 of the factors that are part of the system of production. These inks are part of the system of production, okay? So you don't need to know every single thing I'm saying, but you have to understand the overarching theme. And here is an example from papyrus, which was a major development because it made the writing flexible and mobile, right? So versus a 1-inch clay tablet, which would be hard to move around a lot of them, this is a much more flexible and mobile surface, very lightweight. And I just want to close that chapter by pointing out that about what is gained and what is lost. That some people did not welcome new technology, as is the same today, right? People are afraid of robots, and then other people really welcome robots, right? It really affects the human experience, thinking about how will technology change our culture, how will it change our values. Those are very big, important questions. And at this time, this is Plato, and he's revealing some of the fears Egyptians expressed when he wrote of Egyptian myths about the God who invents writing. He says, writing is the elixir of memory and wisdom. It could cause forgetfulness in writers because they would not use their memory. Because at this point in time, everything was based on human memory, right? The history and literature and entertainment was all based on an individual's ability to memorize. And he says readers would give only the appearance of knowing things while remaining ignorant and hard to get along with, since they are not wise, but only appear wise. So there's hesitation with new technologies throughout history, and the same when going from an oral to a written culture. Okay, that ends chapter 1. Now, I don't want to really ask questions because I'm over my 10 minutes, and I want to make sure that I get through all the next time. But if you have an outstanding question, like somebody really needs to ask this question right now, you can also write down your questions and send them to the TAs and to me, or better yet, post them on the discussion, okay? If you have a question, write it down while we're going through things, and then go home and post it to discussion, and you'll get a lot of help, because everybody can help. It's been me that's been answering the discussion questions, but I know others of you have the answers, so you should jump in and answer them, like have an active voice. But we're moving on to chapter 2, okay? And in chapter 2 is classical literacy, so we're looking at ancient Greece and ancient Rome, the years 700 BCE to 400 BCE. So again, the petroglyphs I showed from New Mexico are still within this time period, so that was super fun to see them. And like I mentioned, seeing the Book of Kells earlier in this class, and that was like in this like locked cave, but the petroglyphs I could go right up to and touch. It was amazing. Okay, so shapes of letter forms are influenced by tools and materials, just like they were in prehistory, but the tools are a little changed: sharpened bones, charcoal sticks, plant stems, brushes, feathers, and steel pens. And the media is still stone, clay, and papyrus. But visual communications perform physically. So that the communications are actually very physical, like Trajan's column is very large. It has a lot of contextual importance, and there's a performative discourse about it. Writing styles range from expressive gestures in formal writing, like graffiti, versus the ideal shape and constructed models, which is Trajan's column. And definitely the alphabet had a profound leveling effect on society when literacy rates become the majority, but that takes quite a while, right? So still in ancient Greece and Rome, we're looking at 5 to 10% literate, which is a really important consideration in how Trajan's column speaks to people. I have to set my timer again. Bless you. Okay, so this prompt is to consider and understand the shift from oral to literate culture introduce new means of representation